The game played by Magnus Carlsen and Levon Aronian in an ongoing tournament in Miami, US. They actually play a match of 4 games, 2-1 lead for Magnus, and Magnus in the 4th game needs only a draw. Knight f3, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4. Black settles for the d6. We get King's Indian classical or orthodox variation. And after white castles, which is the main move here, we got a strange looking h6. In order to see why this h6 is useful, we should see also what it looks like when we get the main line, which goes with knight c6, d5, knight e7, say we go b4, so-called bayonet attack, black goes knight e7, say a4, f5 is the typical strike by black, but then knight g5 is sometimes a very unpleasant for black. Since this h6 kills the knight g5 plan, it makes sense from that perspective. But also there is another way. If you'd still go with the main line knight c6, Kasparov's favorite is bishop e3, and after knight g4, bishop g5. At some point in chess history this was actually very popular for white. Then black plays f6, the bishop now goes either to h4 or c1. In any case, black's formation is a little bit disrupted, and it makes sense as black to not allow this bishop g5 by playing h6. I think I would wait for black to first go with knight c6. This is typically what white does in the King's Indian. Only when the pawn is provoked, we go d5, attacking the black's knight on c6, and we gain a tempo. Carlsen went for d5 anyway. A possibility is immediate knight h7, and that's another good thing behind h6. This square h7 is available for the knight, which can sometimes even go to g5. But the main idea of going with the knight to h7 is to push f5 soon. Especially it works when the white goes with d4, d5. And we know when the center is being locked or closed like this, the flank attack is going to happen. Well, white is going to be preparing for black's f5, and that's going to be done by playing knight e1, and after f5 we need to take, otherwise black's going to go with f4, needs to recapture the g-pawn, keep controlling this e4 square, and open the g-file for potential attack against the white's king. What we need to do when these pawns are in the center like that is to reduce mobility of those two. f4, typical strike. The point is, if black takes, we're gonna recapture, and black ends up with these 2 pawns, separated and weak. If black pushes e4, which most likely is going to happen, we can organize a nice blockade in front of this pawn, going first with knight c2. You can change the structure anytime with the g2, g4. It's gonna be supported by the knight from e3, but also probably by the pawn from h3. It's up to white when the change of the pawn structure is gonna happen, therefore white enjoys a little bit better game here. Immediate knight h7 turns out not to be that good, so black is continuing the development. And we had bishop e3. It allows something that I was really surprised that black didn't go for, and that's knight g4. We said that that's the reason why we played h6. Of course white needs to keep the dark square bishop, and black gets f5 in, and there is this f4 threat. We just played g3. One of the reasons for g3 is that we are preventing f4, simply because knight h4 is creating a double attack. Quite a dangerous situation for black. But even without f4, black is in kind of a trouble, because we're gonna go with knight h4 no matter what. This pawn is gonna be hit, and the knight on g4 by the bishop from e2. And if only the pawn is still standing on h7, this would not be anything serious to worry about. This knight g4 doesn't really work that well for black. Instead we had knight h7. Carlsen here opted for queen d2. He's attacking h6. And if h5 happens, this pawn may be vulnerable. For example, we can go with knight e1, and after f5 we can take and play f4, after which the expected reaction is e4, and then the pawn is hanging on h5. If they go with g5, what kind of things they're weakening with this? Certainly we can notice h5 and f5, out of which probably f5 is more critical. They would like, as we know, to go with f5 and be supported by the pawn from g6, which is not there anymore. And why this pawn should be supported by another pawn? Well, because in case of f5 and e takes f, and black recapturing with one of the pieces, in this case only rook is able to do that, we get the e4 square for our knight. Definitely white should be at least a little bit better. But also black may be left without possibility of pushing f5, placing queen on c2. Later maybe we can put a knight on d2, bishop on g4, holding the f5 square under our control. It is after all an outpost. So Aronian opted for a very good and thematic for the King's Indian f5. He's sacrificing a pawn h6, so this is how it must be done by white. Now black gets a tempo for the rook on f6, and white, instead of going backwards, I would say queen d2 would be the best, just getting rid of any kind of attacks and giving away tempi for black's pieces to get better and better. Carlsen went for queen h4, which got immediately punished by playing knight df8. The knight is preparing to go to g6 and end up on f4. White wants to prevent it by playing g3 and weaken the king. Let's just see how it ends in case white ignores this threat and plays b4. Obviously knight g6, queen h5, knight f4 and queen h4. Black can get a draw if that's the goal, but of course black would continue with queen f8. The threat is rook h6. Let's say white goes somewhere, rook h6, let's say queen g3, we go rook g6, queen h4 is the only move, we play rook g4 and win the queen. Going back to this situation, white played g3, not allowing knight g6, knight f4, and black just continued with moving the pieces to the king side. The thing that normally we do when we're preparing an attack somewhere and where we actually have more space. And now white kind of admitted that the queen on h4 was not that great, playing queen h5, because this was the intention of Aronian. If he plays that, Carlsen may go with queen e8. It never happened because there is this rook f7 I discovered later, not allowing our queen to get out. She is doing a good job on the back rank, but she can also easily be attacked and maybe captured. For example, if white would be ignoring everything, the knight f6 happens. If the queen stays on the back rank, we have just rook d7 and it's game over. Okay, going back to this position, after queen g7, white decided to go with the knight h4. That's another reason why he moved the queen to h5. The idea of white is to push f4 in order to prevent this knight from coming in, but also it would secure that these pawns are not that much unpredictable anymore. Black went for knight g5, kind of preventing f4, because in case of f4, black just takes, and after rook takes, we have fork. But guess what? White can take with the g-pawn, allowing this covered double check, not only in one way, but actually there are two ways to do it. Surprisingly, there is nothing for black. If only Aronian would have spent a little bit of his time, he could actually have found this f4. It seems like you're surrendering the e4 square for the white's knight to occupy. There is rook h6. White is gonna lose this knight. The pin is there, and that's a concrete threat. The only good move is king h1, running away from that threat. But again, rook h6 seems to be strong and black gets a very good game. We had knight g5 and f4 as we know. Most of you would not go for that, especially if you're thinking that you need to take with the g-pawn. In the game we had the best move, knight e4. Apparently these double checks are not giving black anything. We had king h1 and then rook h6. Wherever the queen goes, the knight falls. But then this move, knight e4. I was surprised. Aronian wasn't. He actually immediately played rook takes queen h5. So apparently that's queen sacrifice, not painful for white at all. Black cannot, of course, take this knight because there is rook g1, winning the queen back. But black can play queen h6, hitting this bishop and the knight. However, there is knight g3, which was played by Carlsen. White is still better, but there is a win, and not that difficult to find. If you want, you can pause the video and try to find it, white to move. I'm going to actually show you the first move. It's rook g1, king h7 cannot be played because there is knight g5, and after wherever the king goes, there is knight f7, discovered check, and attack on the queen. So the king goes to h8, and here is the moment that I would like to ask you to pause the video and try to find how to continue as white in order to end up in an endgame with an extra pawn, which should be winning for white. Okay, I'm gonna go on. If you found knight g6, congratulations, because that's the best move here that Carlsen missed. Goes this way, knight takes knight, rook takes, and now in case queen takes bishop, rook g8, check, king takes rook, knight f6, creating so-called royal fork. Black can try with queen f8, but then knight f6, and just look at this king's position. The other rook is coming to g1 with a devastating effect. Game is completely lost for black here. We had instead knight g3 as we know. He has a pawn, knight and a rook for the queen, but his pieces are much better, much more active. Black must start developing bishop d7, and after rook a1, interesting b5, but apparently that was a mistake. Instead he needed to cover the 7th rank and play a move like queen f6. It is required to defend first before he starts any action somewhere else on the board. You can see how Carlsen is strong when you see the c5 almost instantly played. You don't need to have immediate follow-up. You may have actually a square liberated from the black's pawn, and that square may turn out to be critical. The best was to take immediately, but Aronian went for queen f6. He thought he can actually buy time by attacking the knight and defending the e7 square. However, this may actually even help white, because after knight f3 and d takes c5, the knight easily end up on e5. But first, Carlsen opted for rook g1, preparing this covered check with attack on the queen. Of course, the king needs to move, and then knight e5. Black went for king h7, trying to avoid being checked. White has plenty of interesting options. Went for bishop f7. After knight h5, you're going to be bringing the rook to g7. It's just game over. But also, much simpler was knight takes bishop and rook e6. For example, queen takes b2, rook e7, winning a piece. The queen goes to d8. We have knight f5 followed by rook h6. Black went for bishop e8 to remove this powerful bishop. Carlsen made an inaccuracy here. He could have played a move like, first of all, bishop g8 is very interesting because the king cannot take it. You have knight h5 winning the queen. In case of king h6, you have knight e4. Because black cannot take the knight, you have this fork. Without bishop g8, you can just immediately go with knight h5. And after queen d6, you continue with the same old way we wanted before. And after king h6, you see even this bishop cannot be traded because knight f7 is going to happen. And it's going to be, again, a royal fork. But we had bishop takes bishop, rook takes e8. A good move, rook e3, and then knight g6, after which he could have gone for knight e4, winning the game this way. The point is, you would like to go to h3 and just take on g6 and destroy black here. And that's going to be happening in case of FTX as well. Rook goes to h3, and after knight h4, you put the other one on g4. The idea is to take with the h3 rook to h4, creating kind of checkmate to the black's king, unless black wants to give up the queen, but then white ends up with an extra knight. Instead of playing knight e4, we got knight h5. This was that critical mistake, and game ended in a draw after queen h4, because with the knight g6, it's not that white is only attacking the queen and winning the knight, but also when the queen moves, the rook falls. However, this is what both of them saw. Queen takes this knight, so that after rook takes rook, the queen is able to deliver perpetual checks. Queen f3, rook g2, queen d1, rook g1, and you continue checking this way to get a draw. Of course, you cannot see black trying to go for a win here, because white is ahead by a whole piece. I hope that you enjoyed the video, especially if you play kings in your defense. I'm quite sure that you did. And if so, hit the like button, leave a comment, it would be highly appreciated, and see you soon again in the next video.